Hey everyone, welcome to Journey Church Online. My name is Mark and I'm your host for today. We're so glad you guys joined us, and the service is going to start in just a couple moments. But this month in March, we're in our series called Influencer, and we're talking all about the different things and people that might influence us. So to get you thinking about that a little bit and to have a little bit of fun today, I'm going to give you a scenario and you have to pick which one would you be most influenced to do. So here's the scenario. You're in a big store with lots of people around and a couple friends, and those friends come up with this dare for you. They're daring you for the next minute to do one of two things. You have to sing your favorite song as loud as you can, or you have to dance for 1 minute. Which would you do? Which dare would you take? And maybe share with the person that you're watching with. You're either going to do the dance or you're going to sing the song, or post in the comments. We'd love to hear from you guys on this. Will be a little bit of fun. But for me, I would choose the dance. Now, if you watched a couple weeks ago, you saw the TikTok dance move I did. I am not a good dancer, but I'm an even worse singer. It would be painful for everyone else and it'd be painful for me, so I would choose the dance. But what about you? Would you rather do the dance or sing? Post it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you guys today. But what this series really is all about is we want God to be the biggest influence in our life. And I want to share a couple other options with you that could be of help in that as well. There's two online options. One of them is Discover the Journey. That's going to be happening later today. And it's a 30-minute online session to help you connect a little more and also find out some other steps you can take in your relationship with God. But also on Monday, the 22nd, there's an online growth pathway class, and it's all about reading the Bible and prayer. And that's one of the best ways that God can influence us. And maybe you're kind of new to those things, or you've been out of the rhythm of that for a while. And this class about the Bible and prayer will give you some direction and some steps to take to have God influence you in that way. You can find all the details for those two options and how you can sign up and save your spot for those on our blog. But you also see on the blog some other options for things coming up. You'll see options for network teams and our Journey teams, and then next month we have Easter and the My Story series. So check out all the details on the blog of ways you can connect and take steps in your relationship with God. But we're glad you joined us today for Church Online. We're going to start in just a moment. Welcome again to Church Online. We're glad you guys join us today as we get this chance to connect together in our relationship with God. And just want to remind you again to go to the blog. You can find some details and opportunities to take steps in your relationship with God, and also check out the Connect card on there. That's where you can ask any questions, or if you have a prayer request, you can submit that as well. But if you're someone that's kind of new to the journey, we're glad you're joining us. And if you've never filled out that online guest card, we'd love for you to do that as a way you can connect with us. Maybe this is your first time, you've been watching a few times. go ahead and fill out the guest card. We don't harass you. It's just a way we can connect with you and say hello and welcome you, and we'll send you a gift just to say thanks for joining us. I also want to say thanks to you guys that are giving as well, because your giving, whether you go give on the donate page or you text to give, it goes to all of us, helping us grow in our relationship with God and impacting our community as well. Well, as we get started for Church Online today, the band's going to lead us in a couple songs, but I want us to really just take a moment to maybe remove some distractions that are around us or maybe even in our own mind, and focus in on this God, the God that we can trust and the one that we have our hope in. And as the band leads us in these songs, let me just share this verse with you. It says, "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust." As we sing these songs, He's someone we can trust. He's someone that we can put all of our hope in. And so keep those in mind as we sing these songs together today.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness, for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. For You are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
We're going to sing a couple songs. Let's just take this time to kind of push distractions and everything aside so we can really just focus our hearts and connect with Him this morning.
Still my heart and know I'm letting all my weakness show. He provides a place for me to go. He lifts me off the ground. I quiet down and rest. He restores my hope again. I lift my eyes and I look to Him. He lifts me up. am not alone. You're with me every step. Seasons come and go, but you have never left. I am not alone. You're with me every step. Seasons come and go, but you have never left. I am not alone. You're with me every step. Seasons come and go, but you have never left. You open up my heart and trust. Open up my eyes to see that He who placed the sun, the moon, and stars is here with me. Is here with me. You open up my heart and trust. Open up my eyes to see that He who placed the sun, the moon, and stars is here with me. Still my heart and love, and letting all my weakness show. He provides a place for me to go. He lifts me off the ground. the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive, forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome.
Sing it out, your name.
Your name is alive, that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive, forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus,
Hey everybody, I'm Paul, one of the pastors here at The Journey, and man, I'm so glad that you're with us for the third week of this series, Influencer. In this series, we've been talking about all those things that influence us. And, you know, we all follow someone or something. We are influenced by things around us, and those influences can really affect us, the decisions we make, the directions that we take. But if we're going to really experience the life that God has for us, our best life, God needs to be the primary influencer in our life. But there are some key influencers that affect us in life. One of those, we talked about in the first week of the series, is our past. Our past not only influences us, oftentimes it can define us. It can debilitate us. It can keep us stuck and tethered to our past because of what someone said or did or what we said or did. But when God is the primary influence in our life, we begin to look forward. We can have an eternal perspective, not just a broken earthly perspective, but an eternal perspective. That happens when we understand who we are in relationship to God, who we are in our relationship with Jesus. As a follower of Jesus, we are his children. We're loved. We're forgiven. We have his spirit in us. We have a mission to be a part of. We have an eternal destiny that's secure in heaven. And because of that, then in Colossians it says we need to set our hearts and minds on things above. That eternal perspective will affect all the investments that we make in life with our time, our talents, our resources. It'll affect how we see the world and how we move forward in life. If we want to experience our very best life, we'd have an eternal perspective with God as that primary influencer. In the second week of the series, we talked about how we need to decide what are we going to be under the influence of. Are we more under the influence of culture or of God? In a culture that's more and more hostile to the ways of God, what are we going to be under? 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6 talks about how we need to humble ourselves under God's mighty hand. And we looked at the person of Daniel in the book of Daniel. And one of the key things that he did that can help us as we look to move forward in life and have God as the primary influencer, he resolved, he predetermined, he predecided that he was going to be under God, not under culture. So that when he was faced with difficult moments and pressure on him to go one way versus the other, he'd already predetermined, he'd already pre-decided. And we need to do the same thing if we want to be more under more under God than under culture. You know, we've been talking about social media influencers throughout this series, and their outsized influence is amazing, right? To think that social media influencers have 100 to 200 million followers, that's insane. And I'm guessing that's a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure to look the part. A lot of pressure to not be normal or ordinary. A lot of pressure to say the right thing and do the right thing, and in a cancel culture especially. That's a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure that we don't necessarily face. I actually was reading some about social media influencers, and I was reading how some of the social media influencers, how they buy auto bots to follow them. And the more followers they get, the more money comes in and the more auto followers they can buy. I saw an article about an apartment in New York City that isn't rented out on a 9-month lease or even a month lease. It's rented out for a few hours during different days to social media influencers. They've got all the lighting exactly right and all the right furniture and all the right kind of placement of things. And they were showing pictures of like 4 different social media influencers, all with the very same background and space where they were showing their product or doing their thing. It's a very carefully crafted image. And I think a lot of that is out of fear. A fear that you can lose 100,000 followers as quickly as you gain them. Fear of looking normal. Fear of losing all of the celebrity and dollars that have come with any of their influence. Again, we don't face those same things, but we do face one of those influencers, the influence of fear. Fear can keep us all stuck, and the truth is we all face fear on certain levels. The fear of what could be, the fear of what might be, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of loss of control. In fact, 2020 has been a picture-perfect example of how we can live with anxiety and fear, right? We lost control of a lot of things, and there's all sorts of uncertainty, and for many of us, it left us reeling, fearful, afraid. And sometimes that was of very real, imminent dangers. 5 years ago, we had a garage fire at our house, and we have an attached garage. My middle son was in our family room closest to the garage. He called me because he thought he heard something in the garage, and then it looked like smoke in the window kind of in front of our house. I thought it was just the mist of the sprinklers and the sound of the sprinklers beginning. But I went out to the garage and I opened up the door and flames were shooting to the ceiling. I shut the door quickly and yelled for my family to get out of the house and call 911 and get the dog. My oldest son was gone, but the other 3 and the dog got out, and I ran to the kitchen. I grabbed the fire extinguisher. I went back. I felt the garage door. I opened it up, and I just blasted the fire and the flames, and did next to nothing. That the fire was too big by then, and smoke was starting to pour into the room. I shut the door. I was coughing as I went out. It was real, imminent danger. And for you, this last year, some of you, you've felt that real imminent danger. For some of you, it was unemployment, or you're a small business owner, and there was real fear about what might happen financially. Like you may be ruined. What are you going to do? How are you going to pay for the house? I mean, there was fear there. Maybe for some of you, there's fear with COVID. You have some pre-existing conditions, and there has been a fear of what could happen if you got it, or you did get it, or you had a family member that got it. Some maybe that were very, very sick, or maybe even died. And there was real fear, real fear. Most often, our fear is perceived threats. It's things that could happen. It's imagined. It's those things that we get overwhelmed by anxiety and fear and worried about all the what ifs. Fear is a huge influencer in our life, it can leave us frozen. It can leave us stuck, unable to move forward, unable to make decisions, afraid of what could happen. And so we just kind of stay where we are and hope that we're safe. The heat of the fire can leave you frozen in fear. Now again, sometimes that fire will threaten to engulf us. And there are heavy or real fears, healthy fears that we have even. Like, if you were walking on the edge of a cliff with some friends and you're just chatting with them and talking and not really paying attention and just shooting the breeze, like, you need to have a healthy fear that you're right on the edge of a cliff, right? Like, so you're cautious, you're careful, you're walking with your friends, but you're aware of the steps that you're taking. Of course, a lot of times the fear that we have is unhealthy fear. It's worries and what ifs about all these different things that we play up in our head that leave us stuck, that will cause us to miss out on our best life. In the Bible, the command that we see the most is do not fear, do not be afraid. We see it over and over and over again in the words of the Bible. Matter of fact, I heard somebody say that there's 365 times that do not fear, do not be afraid is in the Bible, one for each day of the year. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a lot. It's the command that we see the most. In Psalm 23:4, we see one example of that. It's in the Old Testament of the Bible. It says this: even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. These verses from God says, you don't need to be afraid, even when you walk through the darkest valley. Why? Because I'm with you. I go with you. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. God's close beside me. He's with us. God is the main influencer in our life. That's what he needs to be, the main influencer in our life. And when God's the main influencer in our life, trust, not fear, will lead us. Trust, not fear, will lead us. So, what's going to influence you more? Will it be trust or will it be fear? Last week, we looked in the book of Daniel at the life of Daniel. Daniel was a guy who was a Jewish young man who had been taken captive into Babylon. And they tried to indoctrinate him into the Babylonian ways, to get the Jewishness, to get the God view out of him. But he predetermined that he was going to follow God. Today, we're going to look back in the book of Daniel at three of his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were faced with the same things that Daniel was. They were taken as exiles into Babylon, and they had decisions to make. They were being indoctrinated and trying to take the Jewishness and the God view out of them as well. And some of the ways that they responded, I think, can help us to have the right influence, to have God as that primary influencer in our life, even in the middle of fear, even in the middle of being afraid. Well, in Daniel chapter 3, King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, he builds a 90-foot high, 10-foot wide, overlaid golden statue of himself. Talk about arrogance, right? He builds this huge statue of himself. He gathers his government officials together and he says, okay, guys, here's what's going to happen. I got the band. They're ready to play. And whenever they play, all the people, no matter where they are to fall to their knees and bow before this statue and worship it. And if that wasn't enough, he said, if they don't, they will be thrown into a blazing furnace and burned to death. Now, that's real, imminent fear, danger, right? There is a real danger that's present in that moment. The king is telling everybody, listen, you're going to bow down and worship me, or you're going to die. Well, the order is given, goes into effect, the band plays, people worship, and then a few people stroll in to see the king. Snitches. Daniel chapter 3, verse 12. It says, but there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up. And the king is angry. Now, these guys had excelled in his kingdom, and they'd always honored the king before, but He's made this edict. He's made this command. They're not following it. And if he's any king at all and he wants to keep control of his kingdom, he's going to have to make an example of them. Daniel chapter 3, verse 13, it says this, "Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, 'Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?'" Now this is the height of the king's arrogance. He not only thinks so highly of himself that he builds a 90-foot high statue, demands people to worship him, but then he's like, no God in heaven, nobody on earth can stand against me. I'm the best of the best. Right? I am all of that, and no one can stand against me. No God, not your God, not anybody's God. The height of arrogance for this king. Now listen, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this is some real fear. They know the king is going to follow through on what he is demanding of them. And they are not going to change their opinion or their view. And so they know they're toast. Burnt toast. Daniel chapter 3, verse 16. "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, 'King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into a blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up.'" Now, I think this is key for us this morning and key for this text, this passage in the Bible. They were willing to follow God afraid. Now, we've talked about, like, do not fear. And I don't really know when I read the pages of the Bible and see do not fear, do not fear, do not fear, like what that really means. Because we all have things that we have that we're afraid, or that we have anxiousness. And so I know that we're not supposed to live in fear, but I know that there'll be moments when we're afraid. And this is a moment to be afraid, but they were willing to follow God afraid. They were willing to follow God anyway. And, we're always going to have moments like that. But we need to be willing to follow God afraid. And there's a couple things that these guys did that, honestly, we saw in the life of Daniel as well. One of them was to predetermine what they were going to do. Like Daniel, they had done the same thing. They predetermined that they were going to trust God. That trust of God would be the primary influencer, not fear. Not worry about their own physical safety, but they were going to trust God no matter what. They knew God. They'd seen his faithfulness. The Bible is broken up into all these different books. And it wasn't compiled into like one big book right away. I mean, it's like all of these different books and letters, and then they kind of compiled it into this library of books. And so when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were around, some of the Old Testament books before them were kind of floating in circulation. They had read some of those, like the scrolls of Isaiah, the book of Isaiah. And I wonder if Isaiah 43:2 was ringing in their ears as they prepared for this moment, as they looked at this blazing furnace in front of them, and they knew that their time on this earth was likely coming to an end unless God did something miraculous. Isaiah 43:2 says this, "When you pass through the fires or waters, I'll be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." Now, it doesn't say that we won't walk through the fire. Don't you wish that? Like, it say, like, if you follow me, you'll never walk through the fire. You'll never go through difficulty. You'll never face hardship. It'll never be difficult for you. That would be awesome, but God doesn't say that. What he does say is when you walk through the fire, you won't be alone. When you go through those challenges, when you're afraid, it won't be just you. I'll be with you. That's such good news for us. And they trusted him to do just that. And we see it in Daniel chapter 3, verse 18, right? They say, but even if he does not, like we believe God can rescue us, we think he's going to rescue us, but even if he doesn't, we want you to know we're still not going to follow you. We're going to follow him. Not only did they trust him and his plan and him working in their life, but they predetermined that they were going to accept his will, whatever it was. They knew that they were living on this little blip of a life. Like if you think about this long line of our life from eternity past to eternity future, and like our life is like this little dot on this, and they knew that. They said, listen, I don't understand all that God is doing from here to there. I don't understand how he's working and how he's moving and all the ways that he might be doing things. And so we're trusting him and we're accepting his will. And so if he saves us, that's awesome. We believe he can and will. But if he doesn't, we still trust him. They predetermined to trust him, and they predetermined to accept his will in advance. How do you do that? Well, last week we kind of talked about this. We said that input leads to output. It's really about this day-to-day engagement with God. They had inputted their relationship with God. They'd inputted time with him. They'd inputted prayer. They'd inputted trust and surrender. And so when they were faced with the fire, they were able to output trust, acceptance of God's will, courage. It all came out because of what they had put in. Well, the king is not happy. Matter of fact, he has the furnace heated as hot as it can possibly be, like hotter than it had ever been put before. And as a matter of fact, the passage that we read, the story that you read there, they say that the guards who went to throw them in died as they were throwing them in. That's how hot it was. And then after a little bit of time, the king goes over to the furnace, and there must have been some kind of like window on the furnace where he was able to look in, or some kind of gap where he was able to look in and not be burned. And so he looks in and he sees they're just fine. Daniel chapter 3, verse 25. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire. They'd thrown 3 in, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Isaiah 43:2. Even in the fire, God is with them. What fire are you facing? What challenge are you facing? Where are you afraid? Real or perceived? Imagined or something that's like right in front of you? You aren't alone. You aren't alone. Let's follow God, even if we're afraid. Let's take steps to trust him. He's good. He's faithful. The king, he calls out Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and there's not a hair singed on their head. They don't even smell like smoke. And then the king responds with this in verse 29 through 30. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be burned into piles of rubble. Yikes. For no other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Now, I don't think God, well, I think he's probably like, King, you got to just chill out, man. Like, you got a lot of anger happening here, right? You're throwing people in furnaces. You're cutting people to pieces. Like, just chill out. But the king finally gets it. Like, he is nothing compared to God. And he doesn't even honor Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He honors God. He says, this God, no one can save like this God. I think God would say, like, hey, I don't want to force anybody to follow me. So, stop with the cutting to pieces and tearing down houses. But honor me, yes. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because they honored God, because they trusted him, because they pursued him and they accepted his will no matter what, they prosper. God honors them. Matter of fact, we see in John chapter 12, verse 26, the same idea. And I don't know how this works, honestly. I mean, I don't understand all of it. And certainly it's not like we do this, so God has to do this, like somehow he serves us. But we see things like this in John chapter 12, verse 26. It says, Jesus speaking, he says, whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. If trust not fear, influences you more, God will honor you. What fire are you facing? Is it real? Is it anticipated? Like, what are you going through? If you will trust God more than fear, let that influence you more than fear, God will honor you. Trust him. Pre-decide that you're going to trust him, that you're going to accept his will no matter what, because he's good and he loves you and he'll never leave you or forsake you. And if you have to, you follow God afraid. Like, even in your fear. Like, because what else are you going to do? Like, if you don't follow God, you're just going to live in your fear, afraid and stuck. So we follow God afraid. We take steps even though we may be afraid. We trust him. And it's really going to happen with day-to-day engagement. It's going to happen when we invest in our relationship with God, when we lean into this relationship with God, when we spend time with him in prayer and reading the Bible, connecting with others, leaning into this relationship with him. Because input leads to output. And so when we input like that, when we're faced with fear, when we have those moments of anxiousness, we're able to move forward. The Bible says to cast all our anxiety in him because he cares for us. And so in those moments when we're afraid, we can go to him, but we keep taking steps forward. We predetermine, we predecide. I'm going to trust him. I'm going to trust him. So I'm going to take a step forward. He'll never leave us. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 6, it recounts the book of Deuteronomy, which is in the Old Testament, where God says that he'll never leave us or forsake us. And in Hebrews 13:6, it says this should be our response. It says, so we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? I mean, this was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? We can say with confidence, listen, God's my helper. He can rescue me. I believe he's gonna. And even if he doesn't, we're still not going to follow you. Because listen, what can mere mortals do to me? What can this king do to me? Like, the only way that anything happens is if God would even allow it. Like, God is not, he's not like, oh man, oh no, the king is in charge now. No. We can trust him. And listen, God's got you. We have nothing to fear. What can man do to us? So we follow God. We trust him. And we follow him afraid. Because again, what are we going to do? We're either going to be stuck or we can move forward. So follow God afraid. Pre-decide that you're going to trust him. Predetermine. Because even through the fire, and we're all going to go through our own fires at different points, we're not alone. He's with us. What's the primary influencer in our life? Does fear influence us, or does trust influence us more? Is God the primary influencer in our life? See, only when he is, are we really going to experience the life that God wants for us? Are we going to experience our best life? We need to make God the primary influencer in our life, which means input, which leads to output. And when we face those moments, when we're afraid, real or perceived, let's follow God afraid. Let's trust him. He is trustworthy, and he will never leave you or forsake you. In the fire, he'll be with you. Let's pray. God, would you help us to trust you when we're not sure, when we're afraid, when we're frozen in fear by the fire that we face. God, would you help us to trust you and to take steps forward anyway. God, we need you in that. Would you help us to predetermine, predecide? We're going to trust you. No matter what comes our way, we're going to trust you because you're trustworthy. You're good. You have our good in mind, and you have never left us, nor will you ever forsake us. God, some of us, we're facing real threats and fear, and we're in the fire right now. God, would you show yourself real to us? Would you come alongside of us in a way that we know that we're not alone, that you are with us? May that continue to give us the courage to trust you. God, we're going to be faced with these things, so help us be people who trust you. God, we want you to be the primary influencer in our life, so would you help us to input in this relationship, to spend time with you this week, to lean into this relationship with you this week, so that when we are faced with those situations where we're right there at the furnace or right there at the fire, that we would have the courage, that we would have it in us, that the output would help us to trust you and to continue to move forward. In Jesus' name, amen.
As Paul was sharing with us today, we should ask the question, what is the bigger influence in our life? Are we more influenced by fear or by trusting God? And I know for me, sometimes I go back and forth. Like sometimes I do let fear be the bigger influence in my life. Maybe it's because of uncertainty, or I can't figure some things out, or some things don't make sense and fear can set in. And that sometimes can be the bigger influence in my life. But what I want and what I want to keep moving towards is trusting God and having Him be the bigger influence in my life. Because I can trust Him. And I think that's probably what you want too. So I would ask you to consider this coming week, what would your life look like to have God as the bigger influence by trusting Him more, have Him be the bigger influence more than fear? What would your life look like this week to trust God more and fear less? Well, hey, I also want to encourage you to look for other ways that you can connect with God and have God be an influence in your life. So again, check out the blog for some steps we have on there, like Discover the Journey and the Bible and prayer class on Monday night. And also for you parents, I want to encourage you to help your kids have God be the biggest influence in their life. And so check out the parent resources on our blog and gather the kids. You can have that experience with them right now. But thanks again for joining us today for Church Online, and we'll see you next week back here. Between now and then, let's follow Jesus. Let's spread kindness. Let's be sharing hope. And remember, we are better together.